installed a smart home system in my house for my 64th birthday. Said it would make my life easier. 3 weeks later, a detective was sitting at my kitchen table telling me that the same system had been used to build a legal case to have me declared mentally incompetent. I didn't believe her at first. I told her she had the wrong house. She didn't have the wrong house. I'm 67 now. I live alone in the same split level in Roanoke, Virginia that Barbara and I bought in 1989, the year our son turned 4, and our daughter was still small enough to carry on my hip. Barbara died of pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, 11 weeks after diagnosis. 11 weeks. We didn't even have time to argue about treatment options. One morning she was complaining about back pain, and by November she was gone. I spent the first year after her death doing nothing. Not grieving, exactly. Just existing. Sitting in rooms she used to fill. Drinking coffee she used to make. I was a high school shop teacher for 31 years. Worked with my hands every day of my career. Built a china cabinet for Barbara on our 20th anniversary, a pergola for the backyard when the kids were teenagers, small things that still stand in corners of this house, accumulating dust and memory. After she died, I couldn't pick up a hammer without my chest going tight. I'm telling you this because context matters. Because what happened to me didn't happen to a foolish man. It happened to a grieving one, and grief makes you porous in ways you don't recognize until it's too late. My son, I'll call him by the name he went by growing up, Theo, though it says Theodore on his birth certificate, drove up from Charlotte for my birthday that June. He came alone. His wife stayed home with their 2 kids, some excuse about a soccer tournament. Theo and I have always been close in the way that fathers and sons sometimes are, not through conversation, but through doing things together. We used to fish, used to rebuild a 72 Chevelle in my garage over 2 summers. Those were good years. The years after Barbara, the closeness had gotten thinner. He called regularly, checked in, but something had shifted in his manner. He was attentive in a way that felt scheduled. He showed up with a wrapped box the size of a small suitcase and a grin I remembered from when he was 12 and trying to hide something. "You're going to love this, Dad. Trust me." Inside was a complete smart home setup, a hub the size of a hockey puck, 4 smart speakers, 2 indoor cameras disguised as decorative lamps, a video doorbell, motion sensors, and a tablet to control all of it. The kind of system you see advertised during football games, the ones with the slick music and the happy grey-haired couple looking delighted by their own front door. "You can talk to it," Theo said, already pulling cables out of the packaging. "Ask it the weather, set timers. It'll remind you about your medications. You can check the cameras from your phone if anything seems off." I looked at the camera shaped like a lamp. Why would I need cameras inside the house? "For safety, Dad." He said it gently, the way you say things to people you've decided need managing. "You're alone out here. It's peace of mind." "I'm not alone. I'm just by myself." He laughed like I'd made a joke. He spent 4 hours setting everything up while I made sandwiches and tried not to feel like a project. By the time he left, every room had a speaker in it, and the front porch had a camera that sent footage to an app on his phone. He showed me how to access it from my tablet before he drove away. "Call me if you have any trouble," he said from the driveway. I waved. That night I asked the hub what the weather would be tomorrow and felt slightly ridiculous doing it. But it answered pleasantly, and the temperature was right, and I thought, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe Theo just loves me and doesn't know how else to show it anymore. I went to sleep in a house full of listening devices and thought nothing of it. To Tumperleap? 3 weeks later, my neighbor Hank stopped by to return a socket wrench he'd borrowed in April. Hank is 72. Retired Navy, the kind of man who says exactly what he thinks and has strong opinions about lawn fertilizer, We stood on the porch drinking iced tea, and I showed him the new doorbell camera, the way you show people things you're still not sure about. He looked at it for a long time. "You install this yourself?" "My son did. Birthday present." Hank made a sound I couldn't interpret. He used to do cybersecurity consulting after his military career, ran a small firm for 15 years before retirement. He'd mentioned it once or twice, but never made much of it. "Mind if I take a look at the hub?" he said. I minded in the way you mind when someone points out a rattle in your car. You don't want to know, but you know you need to. We went inside. Hank crouched over the hub for about 10 minutes with his phone, running something I didn't understand. Then he sat down at my kitchen table and asked me to sit across from him. "Jim," he said, "my name is Jim Albright. These cameras, the one by the front door, the two inside shaped like lamps, they're transmitting to an external server, not just the app on your tablet." "What does that mean?" "It means someone else has access to the footage, ongoing, live and recorded." I set my tea down. "How?" "The hub was configured before it came to you. Someone set up secondary access permissions before the box was sealed, or opened and resealed, more likely." He paused. "The microphones on the speakers are also active outside of wake commands. They've been recording ambient sound." The kitchen felt different suddenly. I looked at the little speaker on the counter, the one I'd been asking about the weather. "My son set it up," I said again, as if saying it would change what it meant. Hank didn't answer that. "I'd call someone about this," he said finally. "Not me, someone with a badge." "To Tumpaleep?" I called the Roanoke Police Department the next morning and was eventually connected to a detective named Pauline Veris in their Financial Crimes Division. She was maybe 50, short hair, the kind of calm that comes from seeing things you can't unsee. She came to the house with a younger officer and spent 40 minutes going through the equipment with Hank present. When she was done, she asked me to sit. "Mr. Albright, your neighbor is correct. This system was configured to allow remote access to audio and video beyond what the standard consumer setup permits. Someone has been monitoring your home, your movements, your conversations." "For how long?" "Since installation." 3 weeks. I thought about everything I'd said out loud in 3 weeks. Phone calls with my daughter. Arguments with the insurance company about Barbara's last hospital bills. Evenings in the living room talking to Barbara's photograph like I still sometimes do. Late at night when the house gets too quiet. I felt sick. "Does anyone have a financial reason to surveil you?" Beerus asked. "Significant assets, property, insurance." I thought about it honestly. The house, paid off, worth about $380,000 in the current market. A teacher's pension from Virginia that wasn't extravagant but was steady. Barbara and I had a $500,000 life insurance policy. After she died, I'd meant to update the beneficiary structure and kept putting it off. My IRA, a savings account. Not wealthy by any standard, but stable. More than many people had. "I'm comfortable," I said. Beerus nodded in a way that told me she'd heard that word before in this context. "Mr. Albright, I want to be straightforward with you. In our experience, when family members install monitoring equipment in an elderly relative's home, it rarely stops at curiosity." Elderly relative. I was 66 at the time. I'd refinished my deck 3 weeks before this conversation. "What does it usually mean?" I asked. "It means someone is building a picture. Documentation, evidence for something larger." She listed options the way doctors list diagnoses, guardianship proceedings, power of attorney fraud, financial exploitation. They watch. They wait for patterns that can be presented as confusion. Incapacity. Then they move. I stared at the table. My son gave me the system. I know, she said. That's why we're having this conversation instead of closing the case. To Tumperleap, I drove home from the police station in a way I barely remember. Pulled into the driveway. Sat there. In the garage, through the side window, I could see the workbench where Theo and I had spent 2 summers on the Chevelle. He was 12 when we started it. I taught him to use a torque wrench at that bench. I told him things at that bench I wouldn't have said anywhere else, the way men sometimes need machinery between them to say true things. I told him about my father dying when I was 19, about the year Barbara and I almost didn't make it, when the kids were small and money was short, and we were 2 people sleeping in the same bed and facing opposite walls. I told him all of it, standing in grease and fluorescent light, and he listened the way boys do when they're learning who their father is. That boy had grown into a man who put microphones in my kitchen. I didn't sleep that night. To Tumperleap, Detective Viras called 4 days later. She asked if I knew a woman named Stacy Drummond. I didn't recognize the name immediately. Then I did. Theo had been dating her for about 18 months, since roughly 6 months after Barbara's death. I'd met her once at Easter the previous year. She'd seemed pleasant, asked good questions, complimented Barbara's china cabinet, which I'd made, and somehow that had made me trust her without examining why. Stacy Drummond had 2 prior civil judgments against her in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, both related to financial disputes involving elderly individuals. One involved a woman in her 80s who had signed over durable power of attorney and subsequently had $140,000 in mutual funds liquidated. The case settled out of court. She's been in contact with an elder law attorney in Roanoke, Ferris said. We obtained this through subpoena. The attorney was sent a preliminary inquiry about initiating guardianship proceedings in Virginia. The word guardianship hit like a closed fist. On what grounds? The inquiry cited cognitive decline, difficulty managing daily affairs, isolation. The assessment requested referenced audio documentation. A pause. From your home system. They had been listening to me talk to Barbara's photograph. There's more, Firas said. Are you aware of any changes to your accounts or estate documents in the past year? I wasn't. Or I thought I wasn't. Viras suggested I pull everything I had, every account, every policy. I spent the next day on the phone. It took until mid-afternoon to find it. My life insurance policy through Nationwide. The beneficiary had been changed 14 months prior. My daughter and son had been listed equally. Now Theo was listed alone for the full $500,000. I had not signed anything. I had not called Nationwide. The signature on the change form when they faxed it to me was close to mine but not quite. Someone had practiced. I sat at the kitchen table looking at a copy of my own forged signature for a long time. Then I called Viras. Then I called my daughter. To Tumperleap. My daughter lives in Spokane. She's 43, works in hospital administration, has 2 kids of her own. Her name is Lena, and she and Theo were never particularly close, the way some siblings aren't. They're cordial at Christmas, but they're different people. She answered on the second ring, and I told her everything. There was a long silence. Dad, she finally said, how long have you known? About a week. And you didn't call me. I didn't want to say it out loud until I had to. Another silence, longer. What do you need me to do? I told her to stay in Spokane. I told her to let me handle it, that the detective had a plan. She didn't like that, but she agreed. Call me every day, she said. I will. I mean it. I know she did. To Tumperleap, Detective Viras wanted me to use the system, not as it had been set up, with me being watched, but inverted. Her team would monitor the feed from their end, watching whoever was watching me. And she wanted me to give them something to watch. We talked about what I would say, how I would say it, what the surveillance was presumably looking for, signs of confusion, of dependency, of a man who couldn't manage his own life. I would give them those signs on purpose, carefully and deliberately, while my mind stayed clear. It went against every instinct I had. "You want me to perform being helpless," I said. "I want you to protect yourself," Vera said, "by letting them think their plan is working." I went home and looked at the camera lamp in the corner of my living room. "Fine," I said to myself, not caring if it was picked up. And then, louder, as if thinking out loud, "I don't know what Barbara would say about all this. I keep forgetting where I put things. Maybe Theo's right. Maybe I do need some help around here." The words were ash in my mouth, but I said them. To Tumpaleep. The response came 4 days later. Theo called, warm and unhurried, the way he got when he wanted something. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing, and then, casually, he mentioned that Stacy thought it might be nice to come up for a weekend, help me go through some of Barbara's things. "Get you organized," he said. "That would be nice," I told him. "It's been hard to know where to start." The following Saturday they arrived together. Stacy had a tote bag full of file folders and a smile that was doing a great deal of work. She complimented the house, made coffee without asking, moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who had mentally already moved in. They spread paperwork across the dining room table. Stacy explained each document clearly and patiently, the way you explain things to someone whose understanding you're not confident of. There was a durable power of attorney form. If I signed it, Theo would be authorized to manage my financial accounts, medical decisions, real property. She used the word "just in case" 4 times in 10 minutes. There was a document from a financial advisor I'd never heard of, recommending a restructuring of my IRA. It would consolidate everything into a single account, managed jointly. There was a brochure for an assisted living community in Cary, North Carolina, 25 minutes from where Theo lived. I looked at these things while Stacy talked. I thought about Barbara at 32, sitting at this same table, going over our first mortgage documents, how her hands moved when she was nervous, how she'd made me read every line twice. "Don't sign anything until you understand it," she always said, "and then read it again." I looked up at my son. "Theo," I said, "tell me about Stacy's history with Eleanor Groves." His face went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Eleanor Groves, Mecklenburg County, the power of attorney, the mutual funds." I watched him. "I know about the insurance policy too, the beneficiary change. I never signed that form." "You know I never signed it." Stacy stood up. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't," I said. The front door opened. Detective Veras came in first, 2 uniformed officers behind her. She introduced herself to Theo and Stacy with the pleasant, brisk manner of someone doing a job they're very good at. "Theodore Albright," she said, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of forgery, conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, and fraud. Stacy Drummond, you're also under arrest." Theo looked at me. I'd seen that face before. Not this expression, but this face. I'd seen it the night he called me from college, 19 years old, terrified, telling me he'd failed 3 courses and didn't know how to come home and say it. I'd driven 4 hours in the dark to get to him, sat in the parking lot of his dorm and told him it didn't matter, that we'd figure it out, that he could always come home. "Dad," he said now, "Dad, I need you to—" "You should go with them," I said. He didn't say anything else. The officer took his arm. Stacy tried to argue. She used words like misunderstanding and context and her attorney's name twice. They walked her out. I sat at the dining room table with the unsigned paperwork and listened to the cars pull out of my driveway. To Tumpaleep, the investigation took the better part of 5 months. By the time the full picture came together, it was October. Stacy Drummond had operated a similar scheme at least twice before the Mecklenburg case. She identified targets through referrals in a network of financial predators, estate sale communities, senior social groups, church directories. She found men and women in the window after a spouse's death, the period of greatest vulnerability and greatest assets. She had been with Theo for 18 months. She'd identified me as a target within the first 2. Theo owed money, not catastrophic amounts, but enough. Business loans from a failed renovation company he'd started during COVID. Credit card debt accumulated keeping up appearances. Stacy had presented my estate as a solution. He'd told himself it wasn't really stealing because it was family money, because I'd leave it to him eventually anyway. That's the part I've sat with the longest. He told himself that. The trial was in January. I attended 2 days of it and then stopped going, not because I couldn't bear it, but because I found that sitting in that courtroom made me feel like a specimen. I already knew what had happened. I didn't need to watch it narrated by prosecutors. Stacy received 6 years, federal charges given her prior history. The judge used the phrase deliberate predatory conduct, and I wrote it down without knowing why. Theo received a suspended sentence, 2 years probation, full restitution, a felony record. The judge cited his cooperation with investigators and no prior criminal history. I know some people would say it was too light. I don't have a strong feeling about his sentence. He did what he did. The law decided what it decided. Those are 2 separate things. I filed a no-contact order. I updated my insurance policy, updated my will, added my daughter as the sole beneficiary of everything, changed my account passwords, closed the accounts Theo had ever had any visibility into, and opened new ones. Hank helped me remove every piece of the smart home system, every speaker, every camera, every cable. We put it all in garbage bags and left it at the curb. The house was quiet after that, but it was the right kind of quiet. To Tumpaleep, Lena flew in from Spokane that spring. She stayed 2 weeks, slept in her old room, and spent mornings with me on the back porch, drinking coffee the way Barbara used to make it, strong with 1 sugar. We didn't talk about Theo much. We talked about her kids, about the garden, about a woodworking project I'd started in the garage, a small writing desk for my granddaughter. On the last day before her flight, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, both of us with empty mugs, and said, "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." I told her to go ahead. "Are you okay? Not about Theo, not about any of it. Just, are you actually okay?" I thought about it for a while before answering. "I'm not the same as I was," I said, "but I think I'm all right." She nodded. She looked so much like Barbara when she nodded. She flew home the next morning. I drove back from the airport alone, same as I'd been driving home from most things for 3 years. But it felt different that morning. Less like absence, more like quiet. To Tumpaleep, I'm sharing this because I wish someone had shared it with me before. Elder financial abuse is one of the fastest growing crimes in the United States. The FBI reports that seniors lose more than $3 billion annually to financial exploitation, and those are only the cases that get reported. A large portion of that exploitation comes from within families, from the people we raised, from the people we still love despite everything. The system my son installed cost about $600 retail. The professional-grade secondary access permissions Stacy configured into it cost nothing but knowledge. The combination of those things was used to build a case that could have cost me my home, my independence, and any meaningful say over the rest of my life. Here is what I know now that I wish I'd known before. When someone gives you a connected device, a speaker, a camera, a doorbell, a tablet, ask who else has access. Not to be paranoid, to be informed. If the answer is unclear, or if you didn't set it up yourself, have someone you trust with technical knowledge take a look. That's not an insult to the gift giver. It's common sense. If a family member begins showing sudden, intensive interest in your finances, your health, your documents, notice it. Ask yourself whether the interest feels like love or like inventory. If anyone begins subtly suggesting that you're confused, forgetful, or struggling, ask yourself honestly whether that's true or whether a narrative is being built. There is a legal mechanism in this country called guardianship that can remove your right to manage your own money, your own home, your own medical decisions. It requires documented evidence of incapacity. Some people manufacture that evidence. Never sign a document under social pressure, not at a kitchen table while someone is being very kind and very patient, not in a lawyer's office while someone holds a pen out to you. Take the document home, read it, have an attorney you chose yourself, explain it. Your hesitation is not an inconvenience, it is a right. Trust the discomfort. When something feels off, when a gift feels like surveillance, when a visit feels like assessment, when a question feels like data collection, trust that feeling. You did not survive 60 or 70 or 80 years without developing instincts. Don't talk yourself out of them to avoid an awkward conversation. And finally, let someone in. The predator's most useful tool is your isolation. Your reluctance to seem ungrateful or suspicious or old. The person who reaches out to a neighbor, a friend, a daughter in Spokane, a detective, is not weak. They're the one who gets to stay in their own house. I still wake up some mornings and forget, for just a few seconds, what the past year looked like. In those seconds, Theo is still my son who rebuilt cars in the garage with me, who learned to use a torque wrench at my elbow, who called me at 19, scared, and had me drive through the dark to reach him. Then I remember, and I get up anyway. I make coffee. I go out to the garage and work on the desk I'm building for my granddaughter. The wood is cherry, smooth-grained, takes the light well. Barbara would have liked it. I'm still here. I still have my house, my name on my accounts, the right to make my own decisions. I fought to keep those things, and I kept them. Some mornings that feels like enough. Most mornings it does. If any part of what I've described sounds familiar to you, a gift that felt wrong, a family member asking too many questions, someone gently suggesting you can't manage on your own, please don't wait the way I almost waited. Talk to someone. Today, not later. The people who love you will understand the question. The ones who don't are the ones you need to be asking. I keep coming back to the garage. Not the investigation, not the courtroom, not the detective at my table. The garage. 2 summers of work, my son beside me, both of us learning what it meant to be in the same space with nothing to prove. That's the thing about working with your hands alongside someone. You can't fake it for long. The real person shows up eventually because the work requires it. I used to think what happened was about greed. I've come to think it was more about cowardice. Theo was in trouble and he didn't know how to say so, not because I wouldn't have listened, but because somewhere along the way he'd decided it was easier to take than to ask. That's a failure of character, plain and simple, not intelligence, not circumstance, character. The willingness to do the harder, more honest thing when the easier, dishonest one is available. He chose the easier one. That choice had consequences he didn't fully reckon with, and then those consequences became mine to carry. I'm not saying this to condemn him. I'm saying it because I spent a long time asking what I missed, and what I missed was this. I taught him to use a torque wrench, but I don't know if I ever taught him that telling the truth when it costs you something is the only version of honesty that actually matters. Maybe I should have said it out loud more. Maybe it would have made no difference. I'll never know. But I think about it. What I do know is what kept me from losing everything. It wasn't luck. It wasn't money. It was three things working together. It was Hank, who looked at a piece of technology with trained eyes and said what he saw without softening it. That kind of clear-eyed thinking, not panicked, not emotional, just honest and precise, is a form of intelligence that doesn't come from a textbook. It comes from years of paying attention to what's actually in front of you rather than what you want to be there. I needed that clarity at a moment when my own vision was clouded by love. It was Detective Ferris who asked me to do something that went against every instinct I had, and I did it anyway. Playing the role of a confused old man while staying completely composed on the inside required a kind of quiet stubbornness I didn't know I still had. That's what resilience actually looks like. Not the dramatic fist-raised version, the quiet version. Getting up and doing the hard thing anyway, day after day, until it's done. And it was, at the bottom of all of it, a sense of what was right, not in a grand, proclaimed way, just the knowledge that I had not wronged anyone, that I had lived honestly and worked hard and loved the people around me as well as I knew how, and that I was not going to quietly hand over my home and my name and my future because someone decided I was worth more as a resource than as a person. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't announce itself. It just holds when everything else is pulling. I still build things in my garage. The desk for my granddaughter is almost done. Cherry wood, smooth grain, dovetail joints on the drawers. Barbara would have run her hand along the surface and said something quiet and true about it. I can almost hear her. That's enough to keep going.